thinking about how this was a very, very different book, and this one was suggested by one of our members. And actually, it was a really good idea because business is not just about business. Business is about people, and people are all about stories. And one thing that occurred to me while reading the book is we have lost, I think, in the aviation industry, the art of storytelling. It used to be that all of the stories, at least in America, were about aviation. You know, the Eddie Rickenbackers, the Charles Lindberghs, the Amelia Earharts. The people in the news were heroes and they were aviation people. And nowadays, you know, the only time they talk about aviation is a story about climate change or about um, economic disparity or something else that does not paint aviation in a very good light. So, you know, I don't know if it is the same where you guys live, but, you know, that's what I've noticed is just, I think we gave up storytelling and we let other people do it. And, you know, the people in the media don't really know aviation well enough to tell stories from this industry. Thoughts, opinions, ideas?
You dropped out for a second. Sorry, Paul.
Oh, no, that's
What
okay.
you said? What thoughts, idea? Yeah, I think storytelling is critical,
It is.
and yeah, I think that you're right. I guess the heroes of aviation are kind of gone since some guy landed in the Hudson River.
Sully Sullenberger. Yeah, that was a good
Yeah,
story,
that
right?
was a great story, and he told it well. And then they had Tom Hanks play him, which didn't hurt.
Of course. Yeah, if Tom Plank plays you in a movie, you know you made it.
Right, Tom Hanks, Harrison Ford, those are the two.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, that is true. And, you know, I
as
think
opposed to Liam Neeson, in which case, I guess you're the bad guy.
that's true. He's kind of a good bad guy or a bad good guy. But I
That's right.
guess
That's right.
the point is that, you know, whoever is telling the stories gets to set the narrative, you know, and if we aren't telling stories, then they're going to tell stories about us. And they're not going to be the good stories, you know, they're going to be the economic stories, the ecological stories, the other side of everything, you know, rather than what we want to say, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think aviation people need to become better storytellers, and I think that will help um, with a lot of the things, you know, like the airport in California that was being closed because they make too much noise and all of those things. And it's basically because the media in that area is really controlled by people who are not aviation people. And they see that a small percentage of the population is causing all of the noise and all of the pollution and all of this and all of that. And so, you know, then they're telling one story, but the people in the aviation world tend not to tell stories because we're afraid of looking bad. We're afraid of being painted as elitist or um, we have confidentiality issues, you know, where we can't talk about our clients, our patients, our students, our whatevers, you know, and things like that. So in a lot of cases, we can't tell some of the stories we'd love to tell, right? Okay, so John Wayne, you know, is one of my heroes, you know, and he had a quote, and I can't actually prove that he said this now in the days of AI and everything else. But, I think this was on a plaque, you know, in one of my elementary school teacher's rooms. So I don't know whether this is true or not, but I'm gonna take it as true because I wanna believe it. He said, "It's really hard to dislike a man if you know his story." And, I think that's true. I've noticed even, like, in the Disney, um, lexicon, they've started telling stories like Wicked. They've started telling the stories of Cruella. They started telling the stories of the villains, and they actually become heroes when you turn that around. And, I think we can do the same thing. Yes, there's a lot of things that people don't like about aviation, but there's also a lot of good that we just don't tell the stories about, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's funny that when I worked for the governor,
Mhm.
the successes we had in government were some of the best kept secrets in the world.
Yeah. Why is that? Is that because of
Well, John thought, sorry, Governor Hickenlooper, John
yeah,
thought that he wanted to hit the home runs first and talk about them later. But
Okay.
then once he hit the home run, he was busy hitting the next home run.
Yeah, and you're on to something else and it's old news. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I think that happens with us as well.
But yeah. So I think that's true. And I don't know, when you're teaching, like when I was flight instructor, the lessons were learned in the errors of others, not necessarily in the I mean, it's hard to teach a student by telling them that someone else was perfect,
Mhm. That's true.
but maybe it's the better way to go. I don't know. I don't
Nah, well, I mean, I think we all have to have good role models and bad ones, "This person screwed up and don't do that," you know? That's always really
Right.
inspiring.
Yeah, don't do that.
Right?
Yeah, but
Let's not fly under the power lines.
Mhm.
what about the stories of search and rescue for stupid citizens that do stuff on weekends and helicopters from the military? They go out and pick them up and take them to the hospital.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's
that's true.
right?
We do like a good rescue story.
We love a good rescue story, and, yeah, Erica and Sim Shane and, those guys do a lot of that nowadays. They can't talk about specifics, but that doesn't mean you can't tell the story. So those are really, really good stories to tell.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Erica would have been good. We could have heard her stories. Where is she? Call her up.
I know, Erica and Anna Marie, she's the one that suggested the book, and then she's not here, so here we
Oh,
are.
no.
That's okay.
We'll
No,
we'll get
it's
even. We'll talk about them.
we will talk about them. That's always, part of the risk of proposing a book and not coming, so there we go. Right. No, I think it's really important, to be doing all of that. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasons that we don't talk about some of the good things that happen in aviation. There's a lot of reasons that we don't talk about some of the bad things that happen in aviation. But I do think that we can tell stories and we can do a better job than if we leave that to other people. If we leave that to the media, if we leave that to the um, New York Times and the Time Magazine and, the others and so forth, and to the TikTokers and the others, that are not in aviation, then they're gonna tell their side of the story, which is totally fine, but we need to get better at it, if we want to survive as an industry, I think, and, that's one of the things that, we have only ourselves to blame. If we don't tell our story, somebody else will, and we're not gonna like how they do it, and, there used to be I had a teacher that was, Navajo, I think it was 4th grade, and, he was really, really, really big on storytelling and, the talking stick and all of that stuff. And we would go around and tell stories, in the room, about what happened with our weekend and so on. And that was one of his rules is, especially if more than one kid was involved in a story, and was telling the story, you do not get to interrupt. If they're telling the story, they get to tell it their way because that's their experience. And so if you don't like the way they tell their story, you can tell your own, but it's if they're the one speaking, it's theirs, they have the stick, right? And, they have the power to, control the narrative until you pick it up, in which case, then it's your responsibility to tell that story and to tell it accurately and to tell a good story and to, do the best you can with that, right?
Yeah, those 2 issues are pretty bad. I mean, as an example,
Mhm.
story I don't tell very often because of the little green check mark.
Okay.
It's we, got no I flew helicopters for the military and sitting on alert, and we got a call that some kids were in a tent fire and were not didn't think they were gonna survive. The problem with this was we were in Tucson, they were in Mexico, and to do this, quote, by the book, you had to call all the applicable people, get cleared through what they call the ADIZ, or Air Defense Identification Zone, and by the time all that happened, these kids were gonna be dead. So, another guy and I grabbed a Texaco road map and took off to Mexico. And got to the border. We went down to 50 feet and we went over the border, didn't ask anybody to do shit, went on, landed by the remains of the tent. And of course, they had their version of what do you call it? Red Cross there.
EMT.
So, and we went over and got to take the kids, put them in a helicopter, and these guys started getting ready to pull the IVs out of them. Oh,
Mm.
without the IVs, they're going to die. And the guys, we said, oh, wait, whoa, whoa. Well, this is socialized medicine down here. Nobody pays for this stuff. I mean, it's the people on this. So I looked at my buddy and we almost had the same idea at the same time. I said, tell you what, how about we give you oxygen bottles and masks out of the helicopter. You leave the IVs in and put the kids on board. And we did all that and then flew them directly back to the St. Mary's Burn Center in Tucson, landed on the grass outside that place. And they came out, grabbed the kids. They survived. And I mean, like a month or two later, the dad of these kids came by and wanted to pay us. I said, no, you're paying taxes, man. Don't worry about it. This thank you is way, way, way over the top. This is what we do.
Yeah.
And so, just a nice little story. But if somebody back then wanted to get crazy, we did all kinds of things wrong.
Right, yeah, they could have come after you for breaking the law, for giving away government property, or, I mean, all kinds of things. It was the right thing to do, but that doesn't mean everybody would see it that way, right?
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the problems that we have, in this day and age is that it's so litigious and crazy that a lot of people don't want to give details, but I still think we can tell stories in ways that aren't gonna get anybody in trouble. And that, we can leave out the bits that we need to leave out. Um, so, one of the things about this book is it was written for a middle grade audience, but the storytelling was excellent. And I think part of the when you're learning to do something, like, when I was trying to pass the GMAT, I went back to, some little kids' algebra software to relearn some of the stuff that I had missed or I didn't get quite right when I was in school. So, when we're learning to do storytelling, sometimes if we read short stories that are pretty simple, you can learn the mechanics of how do you start a story? How do you build character? How do you convey emotion? How can you be specific if you can't be specific? How can you show that conflict and growth? Because if the story is just happy all the way through, it's not really a story. You have to have an arc of tension that builds and builds and builds and then comes down to a conclusion, right? How do you show some subtlety and some empathy? Those are things that are the things that I think are really easy to learn from short stories and especially short stories for kids, right? So those are really cool lessons I think that we can get from a book like this. And, it wasn't even about aviation, the flying lessons was actually metaphorical. It was a kid learning to be outside of his comfort zone, and for a little further every day outside of his comfort zone. So, those are things that are way outside of our usual book list, right? So here's some of the techniques I think that I picked up, and also use ChatGPT to kinda help summarize and things like that from the book. But, I think these are things that we can use when we write stories and when we tell stories, when we tell client stories, when clients tell their stories and things like that. And in a lot of cases, we can use some of the tools that we already use to help do some of these mechanical things. I was a writer before I was a marketer. I was actually in journalism school. So, stories I think are the most important part of marketing, because those are what really drive people to make a different decision. And what we're doing as marketers is we are trying to get people to change the way they do something and do it a different way. Stop keeping your records on paper and start using vision logbooks. um, you know, Stop using this charter provider and use a different one. And here are the reasons why is when we give them good stories. Anyway, so these are some of the techniques that we can use, and we can use these in different ways using the different tools that we have. We can do this visually, using video, as we start doing, and I think what's going to happen as video gets better, and you guys have been absolutely amazing. I was actually um, really impressed with the work you guys did with app props and the Daisy, and things like that. We're starting to tell some really short little stories in video, and those are using a lot of these techniques using the tools that we have, and they just become so much more powerful. It's not just a cool picture, and it's not just a little bit of text, something that really tells a story, right? I don't know if anybody has any challenges that they've run into with a client, and ways that you've resolved it, or anything that you'd like to share. We'll actually get into that. I'll get through the rest of these slides, and then we can talk about all these things in more detail and things like that. But I guess, question 3 is the one that is the most interesting to me for this purpose, is how can we apply storytelling to do better case studies or better emails or better advertising? And what are some of the stories in the aviation industry that we are not telling, and why are we not telling them? And, in the case of the DBT, I mean, of course, there's a lot of stories that haven't been told yet because they don't exist yet. But we could go back through history and say, here are some of the things that have happened in aviation, and here's how we're going to address those things. And also, how can we make sure that we respect our clients' confidentiality and NDAs and everything else? Marketing is the opposite of security. John and I are like two sides of a coin. He's always trying to make everything secure, and I'm always trying to make everything as public as we can. So, we're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Well,
Yep.
one of the
Yeah.
stories that doesn't get told
Mhm.
is the story about, well, as an example, I flew a helicopter into what's the school, middle school, I guess, for a static display.
Junior high,
I
middle
got
school. Yeah.
I got all of the clearances from all of the people, from the principal, the school board, the military, I mean, everything. Took about a month and a half. We flew it in there, and we even flew it in so that we didn't make noise. So, we landed in a bunch of trees and hovered over and shut it down. And then we got every kid to sit in the pilot's chair over
Mhm.
the course of the day. And as an aside, we had a Japanese couple, old couple, walk over, and the lady was able to speak English. And this guy flew against us in the war, and he wanted to sit. I said, "Sure."
He was a helicopter pilot.
Well, no, he wasn't. No,
Oh,
but
okay.
he wanted to sit
Yeah.
in a helicopter, and she wanted him to sit in the back seat. So we got in there. They took pictures, and I talked to her and said, "How about if we sit him in the pilot's chair?"
Yeah.
This guy was so proud, and the pictures they took. I mean, those kinds of things don't ever get published, ever, but those are things that need to happen. And then the reason I'm telling this is because next year, I mean, my son was there that year. The next year, my daughter was there,
In the
and
same school.
do the same school, want to do the same thing, want to tell all the same people, and every freaking one of them said no. No reason,
Huh.
just no. So we had to go do a static display at the airport, and that's what we did. And then they bussed everybody out there.
Yeah. Right. And I know, like, SSC, there's a park, next to SSC. They've helped with the fundraising for it. And, there's a lady, Laura Kaufman, that set this up. She had kids in one of the local schools, and she set up a field trip program for 4th graders and 8th graders to come to the airport. And, the kids, they'd stage them at the park, so that they'd only take, 4 or 6 kids at a time, through the control tower, through the airport, show them the planes, have, SSC and some of the other companies on the airport, show the kids around and, tell them about some of the jobs at the airport and some of the things that you can do, and you can drive a tug, and you could fly an airplane, you could fix the airplanes, you could work in the tower and tell the airplanes where to go. There's so many things that are so interesting for little kids, but you can't get within a mile of an airport nowadays, as a little kid.
And like all these kids that
Yeah,
and that's for a lot of those kids, they'll probably never get that close to a machine like that again, ever.
yeah, exactly. So, I think it's amazing, and, little kids are one thing, but even just the stories are something else. So, yeah, I think, stories change minds, and they build trust, and everybody is really kind of hardwired, I think, from the time we were little kids to listen to stories more than we listen to anything else. So you can tell people facts and figures and, everything else all day long. But if you can make it a story, that's when you really get their imagination and get them visualizing using a product or, being involved in some way and all of those things. So um, I don't usually do a slide deck um, for these book clubs, because it's just about us and it's just about the book and it's just about those kinds of things. But I wanted to do one this time just to kind of frame what was going on because it was such a different book than what we usually do, and I think that's probably worthwhile. But the rest of the conversation is ours. I didn't want to dominate it with an agenda, but I just wanted to kind of start us off in that direction and see where it goes. So. One story about storytelling, when I was in college, I took a fiction writing class, and we would go to a coffee shop we would meet, that class would meet instead of meeting in a classroom, we would meet at a coffee shop, a couple of blocks from the University of Utah, and the assignment would always be pick a table and, of people who are at this coffee shop and tell their story. And so, what that taught us to do was how to be observant to the people who are sitting at the next table over, or the next table over, the next table over, and, maybe they've got kids, maybe they're just on their way to somewhere or coming back from somewhere, and you would make up a story about this family based on what was going on and what you could hear about their conversation and what they ordered and, all of the dynamics and things, and that really taught us story structure. Are we at the beginning or the middle or the end of a story right now? And what is the story that's going on here? And I think that was a really, really good exercise for storytelling, um, building that curiosity and other things. So I know you guys have different stories and have different ways of telling them and have ways of finding um, the thread, finding the inspiration or whatever for a story. Another thing we learned was to always keep a notebook of stories, and a notebook maybe of characters that, maybe they don't work in this story, but they might work in a future story, something like that. And this is great because if you ever meet somebody you don't like, they become a character in your head, for a future story, you know, and you can remember, things, and it makes you, what is the word? More curious than malicious. Why do they do what they do? Why are they this way? Why are they so grumpy? Something must have happened to them. And, then you either find out more about that person or you make up a story in your head about why they are the way they are. And that's a coping mechanism for me as well as a storytelling technique. If I'm working with somebody that maybe is difficult or whatever, sometimes you can work through some of those things by thinking about that.
But yeah, but I think the question we need to talk about is how do you, uh, well, for this group,
Mhm.
how do you instigate somebody to tell a story?
Oh, yeah. Good question. in the Navajo tradition, it was always like a planned event. People would get around a fire and they would have actually a stick that they would pass from person to person, the talking stick. If you wanted the stick, you would pick it up and then you would have the floor somebody, until you put it back down again. Nobody could take it from you. That was the tradition. And that's what we did in class. So,
Well, and that's fine and all, but we
yeah.
live in this world now.
Hmm.
And how do you
And
definitely
attention.
how do you get somebody's, particularly because of what we're talking about, is how do you get the media's attention
Yeah.
gracefully
Hmm.
to tell your story?
Hmm. That is a good question. And there are some techniques. And there is a book I think we're going to read next year called The Attention Merchants, that talks about that. Basically, the social media are selling attention. And how you use those mechanisms, the hashtags, the algorithms, all of those things. And Adila, this is kind of your area of expertise. You went to school for many years on this one, and I'm just a beginner. But I do know that there are some ways that you can get somebody's attention and then earn it over a period of time. You have to have a great hook, and then you can tell the story, as opposed to, back in the old days of Star Wars, where long ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was all of this stuff happening. We don't have time for that now. We have to start with a plane crash or whatever, and then build back from that to, get people's attention and then use it properly.
Yes, basically, with social media, the attention span of the viewers is so little that you have to grab their attention in the first 5 seconds or 10 seconds. So some people use the technique of a hook. It can be a question, it can be something that the people can relate with. Some weird question, or starting the video. Just that you mentioned in a reverse way, or nowadays there are also, I have also seen some videos, the people put a video of an accident and suddenly they change the video towards their brand. So the accident catches the attention of the audience, and then they tell their whatever brand story, etc. So there are many techniques and it keeps evolving. Trends comes and go, and social media is so fast to keep up. But yeah, that's but the basics are same. You have to have a hook to grab the attention.
Right. Like the difference, Taylor Sheridan's one of my favorite storytellers. I don't know how many of you guys have seen any of the Yellowstone series or anything like that, but every episode starts with, in fact, the first episode of Yellowstone started with John Dutton shooting his horse, his favorite horse, and it was just this heartrending scene, and it's like, "How did we get here?" So, he starts with that hook, and then he gets on the phone and he's explaining to somebody, "Here's what happened. We were in an accident on the freeway, and, the trailer got knocked over and, the horse got injured and everything else and so forth, and this is how we ended up here." And then you're in this story going, "What the heck happened to cause this situation?" And every single episode, this is, one of those contradictions, because people will watch Yellowstone for hours and hours and hours and hours. It's like a series of serieses. So, and Game of Thrones, and there's a lot of other things. So people who say that people don't have an attention span these days aren't paying attention, because the difference, I think, is that they have to earn it every single episode. They start with a bang and they end with a cliffhanger, and that's how they earn attention for the next
Uh,
span of time. Yeah.
I remember when I first watched The Lord of the Rings, I was so hooked. I was so
Mhm.
hooked. I
Yeah.
was like, how even a writer can make a story like this? Like, how can he create this whole universe, and the universe has its own rules and regulations and realms and so much more, and so many different characters. I was so hooked. I was in love with the story. I have rewatched all the 6 parts over and over again, and it's the start is very amazing. The start, it starts with this tale of the ring and how the rings were forged, etc. It's catches the attention of the person. So it was like the series that I can never forget.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a well written story. Um, J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were, I don't know if you remember, were colleagues at Oxford. And so, they would comment on each other's stories. And C.S. Lewis was writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and, all of those kinds of stories. And J.R. Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings. So I think it's just so interesting that they were probably telling each other, you got to make the beginning better. You got to make the beginning better. You got to make the beginning better. And this is true even of like email. Um, you have to make that subject line something that people will open because if you don't catch attention at the very beginning, then it doesn't matter how great the story is and how much time you spent writing an entire language of Elfish, or whatever, and building this whole world with all the maps and things. If you don't get people into the front door of the story, then nobody will ever see all this hard work that you've done. So I think that's a
Interest interesting you brought that particular series up. We just finished watching the whole thing again, and,
Mhm.
they have, an extended version now.
Mhm,
Yes,
mhm.
yes, they
Takes
have.
12 hours to get through it.
It took us a week and a half to watch the whole thing, but it was so good, right? That is amazing. I really admire C.S. Lewis. He's one of my very favorite or sorry, J.R. Tolkien, he's one of my very favorite storytellers, also C.S. Lewis. But they both have excellent, excellent structures, and, I think that's how they have been so successful.
Harry
Um
Potter as well.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's also very great.
Mhm,
Yeah, but how do you take the average, if there is such a thing,
mhm.
aviation individual,
Yeah.
and they all have stories,
Mhm,
but one, they need to tell it to the right person,
mhm.
and you have to have some means of starting that, you know?
Yeah,
It's not just telling the story, you have to have an intro to somebody that may not care, but you want them to listen anyway.
exactly. And asking somebody for 20 minutes of their time is just about impossible these days. And if you ramble and you don't have a good structure, then you're gonna lose their attention no matter how amazing the story is if it's not told well, if it's all jumbled together. I was just talking to a friend of mine about, when my son was little and he would tell you, like if you went to a movie with this kid, and he's a little kid, he's like, 4 or 5, 6 years old. You go to a movie with him and then he's telling you about the movie and it takes him like 4 hours to tell you about a 2-hour movie because he kept going back and forth and losing the thread and not having a structure around what he was saying. It's just whatever came into his head was spilling out of his mouth, and that is not how you tell a story, at least not in a compelling way. But I think people think it's not a skill. They don't respect the structure. They don't respect the, um, the tenets of, yeah, I'm gonna put the slide back up. The bits and pieces of what is required to tell a great story, and, that's where it comes into this can be learned, absolutely. This is something that is right. So this is how it's done. You asked about the how, and I think besides this, we need to add to this the you start with an emotional hook. You start with this is why you care. This is what's going on. John Dutton shooting his horse, or starting with the ring. Actually, I think the Hobbit started with the cutting off the finger of the what was his name? With the ring on it, and you're going, how did we get here? You have to start with something surprising, shocking, interesting, unusual, and so on. And saying it in detail. All of these things are really important. This is how we got to where we are.
Yeah,
And
but when you do let's just take that apart for a minute.
Mhm.
Let me give you an example of something happened to me and see if I do any of this correctly and see if any of you actually are interested.
Okay.
So, I lived in Indiana, and I went to Michigan every week for reserve. I decided to rent an airplane and fly this particular weekend. Clouds, not a problem. Got to be late at night. So I have called the appropriate control agency, and they said, yeah, go ahead and make the approach and land. And I pushed the microphone button to respond to that and lost all electrical power. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, that's why you take flashlights, right? So I got my flashlight and I'm doing all this stuff. Well, I mean, electrical power, that means no radios, no navigation radios, no lights. I already had the landing gear down, thank goodness. But there was nothing. I mean, the only thing that worked were air pressure gauges and the clock. It was wound up, right? So, and there are things to do, right? So this was actually a non-precision approach, meaning you go down to a certain altitude and then you fly that altitude for a certain amount of time and you're supposed to see the runway. And if you don't, you're supposed to go do something different. Well, I did all that and didn't see the runway. Now, I can't do any of the things by the book because the book says you go to your alternate airport. Well, I can't, there's nobody I can talk to, so I can't go up and I can't change anything. So, I mean, all this happens really fast in your mind. You think, well, I'm going to land sometime because if I don't do it where I know where I am, it's going to run out of gas and it's going to be messy. So, I did what they tell you not to do, which is to descend further. But the two things I had going for me was I had made this particular landing approach and everything else in a helicopter hundreds of times. So I knew where I was. I knew what was below me. But I ended up going down 100 feet below what they called the minimum descent altitude, saw what was going on, and then went over and landed. Well, they already had a pre-assigned parking place for me, which was on the end of the field, and it was snowing. So I went over and parked. And then I had to walk about a mile and a half back to the op shack. And when I got there, everybody was upset. Controllers saying they lost you off the scope and blah, 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 blah. And you need to, I said, hold it. And I told them what happened. I said, oh, well, you need to call these guys and tell you're okay. I did. And so, is that interesting to anybody? I don't know.
Okay. I want to stay married to John, so I don't necessarily want to pick this story apart.
It's
But
okay.
there's a couple of things.
I'm not a good storyteller. I know that. So
That's okay. Ben, you
but
want to
I'm
go first?
probably typical of the average Joe
Yeah.
Schmuck pilot.
Well, no, I did not pick it apart, but
Oh, of course.
it was an interesting story. It just, you look at, if you looked at telling it the way, like if you look at the Sullenberg story, they started with landing in the river.
Yeah.
You start
And
with the lights going out. There's a bunch of flying magazine stories like that, and then the lights go out, and then
Right.
they talk about.
and you
Then they
started
write the
with,
story.
I lived in Indiana.
Right. I was wondering where that was going. There you go.
So how's that for a hook?
And then
Is
the spaceships landed.
there are a dozen hooks in that story that would be better than I lived in Indiana, right?
Although
Yeah.
you
I
could
mean,
make that something. What was that? Isn't there a writing competition? It was a dark and stormy night.
yeah, that's true. They give you the first line and you're stuck with it. But if you get to choose the first line, that's the most important part. Why do I care that he lived in Indiana? I care that, let
That's
me tell you
true.
about the time everybody thought I was dead, for 15 minutes. Or
Right.
let me tell you about the time when I did everything wrong and it turned out great. I broke every rule in the book. Or at least I broke at least 5 rules that I can think of, and it turned out, there's a lot of ways to start that story that would be if we just learn one thing today, and that's, how to start a story, I think that would be, very profitable for all of us.
That's interesting. How to
Yeah,
start a story.
right.
Good point.
And it can also start like this. That one time I almost lost all controls while flying.
Right? He did, actually, not just almost. Lost power and lost all, yeah, so that's,
Or that one time I landed without any power
mhm,
or something like that.
yeah, with no electrical power.
Yes.
But yeah, a couple of other things from that story. Uh, the non-precision approach, there's a couple of things there that would be, depending on the audience, might lose people. Things like that, you could say, "I was uh, doing this in a way that required more so that people know why it was important that you lost power," that would add to the tension in this story. You start with, "Here's what happened, build, 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 conclusion," and,
Well, the thing that made it more interesting to me was I was by myself. There was nobody there to help.
yeah, right? And, that is why I always have a co-pilot. I don't think I will ever fly solo, unless and I did solo flying because you have to get your rating, but why not have somebody else in the plane, I mean, I think that's crazy, so anyway. No, and that's a great story, and, I think there's, so many really good ones, and it's just a matter of taking the same idea, and you could make it so much more interesting, and people would, not check out when it's just like, "Okay, he's talking about Indiana," or going off in the wrong direction and going, "Okay, this doesn't apply to me." If you start with the right hook, then it applies to everybody and they want to know, well, how the heck did this happen? How did we get here? That's the response you want from a hook, right? Or tell me more about how you did that, or tell me more about the situation.
I led with Indiana because I wanted the conversation.
Oh, I know. You wanted to give us a good example. So that's great. Anybody else have any thoughts or examples of any of these ideas?
Well, pitch decks. It's what I'm sitting here writing.
Okay.
How do you apply this to the telling? I'm looking at the list and thinking, well, you want to be able to tell. There's a standard format for pitch
Mhm.
decks for presentations,
Yeah.
and there's a challenge between coming up with a way to tell your story in a unique way and frustrating the audience because they expect things in a certain format and you're not that
Right.
format.
Right.
How do you there's a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to put the audience off,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, there is certain elements of your story that are better to be told differently.
Right. Well,
Hmm.
but, I mean, you
I don't
look
know.
at
Just
Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, and Yellowstone, they are all the same story, just the
mm,
details are different. The structure's the same, It's like person has problem, person solves problem, end of in a unique way. Person solves the problem in a unique way, and everybody is better because of it, So it's like person has problem, person builds team, person tries things that don't work, and so on and so on and so on. So, I don't remember who it was. Stephen King said, there are 6 stories.
Yeah.
There's the quest, there's the coming of age.
yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Joseph Campbell.
Hero story.
What was it? I'm sorry?
The hero with a thousand faces. That's how Star Wars came about. It's a hero's journey.
Hero's Journey. Right, that's one of them.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes
It's
there
a
are
whole storytelling time. Hmm.
yeah. So that's the structure. You're stuck with the structure, right? Assuming that's the story that you're telling. And then how do you improve every part of that story so that your opening slide is an absolute showstopper? It has to be the same as everybody else's opening slide in certain ways, but it has to be different in some ways as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
What
kind
you
of
put on.
inspiring, I think, to have a structure and, that's your challenge is how do we make this better within the structure? Cool.
Yeah, it does make for you can stay within the structure, change the characters or change
Right.
mm,
I think, especially for a pitch
interesting.
deck, you need to lean on this one as well. What makes this uniquely applicable to the audience? Why does this apply? Why is this important? So, like in John's story, it's just like any of us can learn from when everything is going against you, you can still control what you can control. Take the little bits and pieces that you have control over and you can influence a good outcome. So that's kind of the cultural perspective or the moral of the story or the what you should take from it. Um, and in a pitch deck, of course, you want them to do something as a result of that. You want them to give you money.
Right.
And that is here's why you care. Here's why this is going to impact you if you are an investor. Here's what happens to you because of this. Cool.
It is interesting about the definition of flying. Like the book is about flying metaphorically,
Right.
being successful in life.
Yeah. Kid moves to Spain, doesn't know what he's
Right.
doing. He's surrounded by all this craziness and stuff like that, and he kind of ventures further and further out of his comfort zone every day. It's like flying lessons. He's giving himself a course
Yeah.
how to fly. Stop hiding in the house and get out and do stuff. So
Right.
and that I think became the title of the book, became the title of the story, etc. But it really doesn't have anything to do with getting in a plane and starting it up and all of that stuff. I mean, it's not specifically about that, but it is the universal truth of all of us have to push ourselves sometimes. And I will tell you, I was practically nauseous before every single lesson. John didn't know this until after I got my license, but I am not a
Okay.
natural pilot, but I can make it work. So that was one of the things that I learned from that. And if I were to ever tell that story, I would probably lead with the um, something about the difficulty, for me, and then how I overcame it. So
Always know where the air sick bag is.
exactly. I was in the bathroom before every single lesson.
Well,
Anyway,
Oh, there's a fair
I'm
number of famous performers that have the same challenge walking on stage.
right.
Quite, I mean, exactly the same. They get sick beforehand. So,
Mm. And it's not like I didn't wanna do it. I really, 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 really did, but that didn't mean that my body was cooperating.
one of the
sure.
guys I flew with had gone through jet pilot training, and when he got to one point
Mm.
where you had an oxygen mask on, you had to fly all the time like that.
You're not gonna tell the story.
Yes, I am.
It's a
every flight,
horrible story.
every flight he took, he regurgitated into the oxygen mask. Every flight, all the way through flight school.
Oh, man.
Well, that is a disabling thing for flight school, and he knew that. So he re-ingested that. So he
Yeah.
wouldn't
Thanks.
be tossed out of flight school. Now that's really wanting to fly.
That's dedication. Yeah, no, I was never, ever, ever sick in an airplane, but, that's oh my god. Thank you for that, John.
So Ben, what's the closest big town in Australia that you're at?
The nearest one to me would be Sydney.
Sydney? All
Sydney.
right. All right.
They're about 5 hours by car, 45 minutes in a Barron.
I'm just going to use that as the clock for you guys.
The clock. Well, yeah, Sydney is the clock for us. We're
Your time zone.
Australian Eastern, either daylight now or standard, but
Mhm.
now we're on daylight.
Yeah.
The
Yep.
interesting thing about here is that the forecast says temperature is just west of me will be 113. So
Mhm. All right. So we always go
it's
around.
warm here. But if you go back to that story, there's this surprising, shocking metaphoric flying. Yeah, I just want to loop back to that slide. So you pick. I like the idea that the story is the structure. That's
Yeah.
important.
Every story has a structure. Every well-told
Every
story.
story has a structure. If you wander around enough, people get lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That is
Sorry,
absolutely
I'm
true.
just wrapping this in my head.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. We always go around and just share one thing, maybe that you didn't know before, or uh, you know, anything that you want to share. So we'll start with John, and then let's see who is next. John, Adila, Angel, Ben.
So you're saying I should have started with
Hmm.
what? I lost power on a approach, or I had an emergency. I mean, what do you say to really set it for that? Tell me.
Is it? Do we want to do
And
an
then the
email? Do we
lights
want to
went
do?
out.
No, I want you to tell me. How would you do it?
Oh, Ben
Back
had a good
to
one.
back.
How to
And then
fly
the
when the
lights
lights
went
go
out.
out,
Yeah.
or
That's fine, but
Mhm.
it's not. It's not serious. I mean, anybody can fly with the lights out.
Okay.
Hmm.
So, let me tell you about the time I broke all but 3 rules, or whatever. I broke at least 7 rules while flying, and still, everything turned out okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't really tell you the urgency of the situation, because the urgency of the situation is I was going to land, whether I
Yeah,
did it with power or whether I didn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was
So,
the choice. That was the choice.
I landed without power.
But that implies the engine power.
Okay, I landed without electrical
Interesting.
power. I landed
Yeah.
a Baron without electrical power. You can be specific, add the specifics. Right. Electricity is highly overrated, there you go. Electrical power in an airplane is absolutely unnecessary. Well, not absolutely
Hmm.
necessary.
No, I wouldn't go that far. Anyway,
Mm,
go on. That's what I learned, is that nobody really knows how to do that one.
okay.
Hmm.
I think we could come up with something good if we thought about it long enough.
Yeah, but then it will sound contrived, and I don't want to do that.
That's true.
That's not true. Following a structure doesn't make it contrived.
No.
You can sound completely off the cuff and still follow a structure. And some of the very, very best speakers do that really, really well by adding details and extemporaneous stuff in the middle, but the beginning, they know what that is before they get started.
There was a great start, whether an Al Gore fan or not. He had a
Mm,
presentation and it has a fantastic start because he said, he got up and he says, I had this whole presentation planned, but there was a dinner last night. And when I was talking to people, they had a different view of the topic. And so, I listened very carefully and I readjusted my presentation and people started applauding. And he goes, no, 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 I'm trying to lower your expectations here because I only did this last night. And I thought that was a really good beginning
that
because
was a good
now
beginning.
you want to see the presentation and find out what he changed. But that was
Elevated
so funny.
curiosity,
No, no,
right?
no. I'm trying to lower your expectations here
Mhm,
I like it.
because
mhm.
I only did this last night.
Good.
So, and of course, then it was an amazing presentation. But there you go.
Of course, of course. Now he's actually pretty gifted as a speaker. There's a lot of things
He's a
you can say about him, but that is one. That's
he's a
right.
gifted speaker,
That's true.
and he has help. That the organization that helps him, the Duarte Group, is quite amazing.
Ah.
That's who does his. Well, he used to do his pitch decks,
Mhm.
all his slide presentations. They're a pretty amazing group. So
That's cool. We need to hire them
actually,
if we
they
can
have.
afford
If you
them.
want to do if you were interested in something, funny enough, because I know them, they have a book called Resonate.
Oh, there's a good one for next year, maybe.
Yes, it's really cool. Besides the Arnold Schwarzenegger pictures, um, they do this, which I really like. This is called a spark line. This is from Richard Feynman.
Okay, I've read this. I've read
Yeah,
this article, not the whole book, but yeah,
yeah, she's very good. Oddly enough, I know her, so there you go.
cool. Adila,
Okay.
thoughts?
Um, well, I think today's discussion was very fun because we discussed a lot of stories. Um, and obviously, I have repeated it so many times that you all must know my story.
Yeah.
So basically, how I my struggle to building my personal profile on LinkedIn and learning everything on the LinkedIn and then outreaching the aviation clients and finally meeting you is the like personal story of mine that I share every time when I am introducing myself. So basically, it was not about joining ABCI. It was more about finding my way back into aviation because I was so lost into I don't know what industries and I was not happy, depressed, basically. So then it my story is that I create my own opportunities in a way because I was also when I was working with you, I also managed to get some other aviation clients as well. So in this way I found my way back to aviation, which I once thought that there is no all the doors are closed. But this is my story of, you can say, creating opportunities. So yeah, and I was also inspired by Moana, the Disney character Moana,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
have watched.
Another
Yeah,
hero's
so
journey, right? Okay.
yes, and her journey, to explore the ocean and everything. So I was like, I should also do what I want to do. So yeah, that's my story.
Good for you. No, that's great. And yeah, that is a story that is worth telling. So that's a story that's worth polishing as well. And you may want to have different versions of it, the short side, the long side, all that stuff. So
um,
yeah.
Now that I remember, it is also a part of my story that I had a great fear of public speaking.
Mhm.
So in my 8 semesters of university, for every presentation, I have a story because I would make up excuses, like dumb excuses. I would go to my teacher and I would say that I cannot speak because I have a I have a sore throat, or I would. But my teachers never. They always made me speak. They never like.
Good for
Never.
them.
Yeah, and one time, I had this thing in my mind that if I will remove my glasses, I won't be able to see the audience, and it would be easier for me to deliver. But somehow my teacher caught that, and he made me wear the glasses. And I
Oh,
was like,
wow. Good for him.
yeah, he made me wear the glasses.
Wow.
So yeah,
Well, it sounds like you had some great guidance, and that's a wonderful thing.
yeah.
Angel, anything you'd like to share?
Um, when I was in college, I really drawn into spoken poetry. It's like it's the single line, the strong voice, or how the speaker really pull you into that whole story when they are talking. Like they have this hook, they build this context, the emotion, and the turning point of their and the climax and everything in just one presentation. So I did some I can relate to Adila about public speaking because I was really into that era with spoken poetry, but in our own language in Tagalog in the Philippines. So I also joined contests in spoken poetry, but in Tagalog. So yeah,
Wow.
I also relate to Adila when I do the when I enter the contest, I remove my glasses because all I can see is blurred. Everything is blurred, so I can deliver it well. I won't get messed up with my storytelling and stuff like that. Because I do have a fear of public speaking, especially in other languages. That is not my first language. So yeah, sometimes I get overwhelmed sometimes, and I can't process everything all at once if it's not from my first language. So yeah, what I learned from that era is um, do how you really want to grab attention, how to shift your whole story into something emotional in the strongest moment of that storytelling that you are doing. You are telling other people, and yeah, it yeah, I enjoyed this conversation because about it can relate to and what I am doing right now in marketing and something like that. Because when creating posts, writing some prompts for images, where we really use some emotion, details, and perspective, so that in just one look, everyone can understand the whole message.
Right. And I think that's the difference between us and AI is we tell stories. AI is not a great storyteller because it doesn't have that emotional connection. It can't tell, that this really connects and those kinds of things. So that's great.
I'm glad you're interested in public speaking because one of our clients started with this. I don't remember how long ago Sherry started.
Oh, that was years and years ago.
What she was doing was sort of like, are you serious? I mean, she wasn't doing much of anything. But then we convinced her to do a public, I don't remember what we convinced her to do, but it was public speaking somehow. And when she did that, she got noticed. And now, not only is her company growing nuts, she's built a warehouse. I mean, she's just, things going crazy.
Yeah. And she loves public speaking now. I think a lot of people go through a phase where something is hard for them and then it becomes their favorite thing to do because they've overcome that difficulty. And that's a whole story in and of itself. But we are out of time. So thank you for coming today. I really love these book club discussions. I really think they add a lot to our understanding of each other and of different subjects and things like that. So we will see you next time.